Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. The new banlist just dropped in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, and I wanted to discuss what the best decks would be for the upcoming season to climb with. So, post-February, basically, when the banlist actually happens. So, yeah, we have not every deck here, but some notable decks here. And we're just going to go through them and discuss what decks are going to be good, what decks are going to get you into Master Tier, and what decks may not be. Now, notably, anything that is Rogue or above is going to realistically be able to get you into Master Tier. And more specifically, Master 1. I think you can basically get to Master Tier with any deck. Genuinely, I saw Warrocks today in Master 2. I'm not joking. I wish I was, but no, that's true. I saw Warrocks today. So, yeah, genuinely, you can get to the Master Tier with just about anything. It's a best of one. Do whatever you want. But, if you really want to specifically climb, yeah, let's just go over those decks. Starting off, I guess, here with Dino, because I think alphabetically is where it is. I don't know. I think this is alphabetical. So we have Dino. Dino I'm going to put in Rogue. Seems like a pretty good spot. It's pretty good at being able to go second as well as going first. However, it mostly is better in board breaker style formats where it has the ability to run a lot of like board breakers. Because Dino tends to do better with those board breakers. However, when it comes to more hand trap centric metas, which we are currently in, I feel like it's not as useful because it doesn't like to utilize as many of the hand traps. And while yes, it can play around hand traps very well with miscellaneous source and stuff like that, it also can just immediately die to like a single hand trap. So it's one of those like give and take kind of moments where if your opponent Ash Blossoms you, maybe you just lose, right? And stuff like that. So I feel like it's fine. Not great, but decent. Same thing with Dinomorphia, which is basically just Dino, except for trap cards. And yeah, there's nothing really for me to say about Dinomorphia in particular. I just feel like it's not all that great. And while, yes, it can potentially win, and it has some things that it can do, it feels like it would be a major struggle to actually get to Master 1. In fact, I might actually just... You know what? Yeah, I'm gonna move this down. This is probably the first one where I'm like, you will struggle immensely to climb with this deck. This is not very good right now. Hasn't been good since release, basically. Sure, Rexstrom is nice, but because of how easy it is for so many decks to just burn you or immediately stop you with the myriad of plays that they have available to them, with things like Infern being so very useful and stuff like that, it just makes it not all that great to play. So, yeah. Next up, we have Dragonlink. Dragonlink is probably a pretty slept-on deck, I will say. I'm going to put it in Tier 2. I think it's a very good deck, and I think a lot of people are just kind of threw it to the wayside because it wasn't as good as it was. And while it definitely isn't as good, it's still very strong and still has the ability to really pop off and basically make the same end boards that it used to previously. It just doesn't really play through as many hand traps as it used to, and still end on those boards. So it kind of has a little bit more problems, but I still think it's very strong. I still think it has a great turn 1 end board. Its biggest issue is going second, I would say. But even with that, it's still very strong and still very capable. Next up, we have Castia. Now, I have Zodiac down here, and normally when I talk about Castia, I talk about Castia Zodiac as well, but we'll get into that later. When it comes to Castia, I've seen 3 builds. I've seen Zoo Cash, I've seen regular Cash, and I've seen the like Snake Eye Castia, and I have to say most of them are kind of mid, with one exception, which we'll get into later. Obviously it's Zodiac Cash, I think, but Castia overall I think it's fine. I think the main reason to play it is because of a Rise Heart. You just like summon a Rise Heart and it absolutely demolishes Snake Eyes. So that's kind of like the whole idea, is you just summon a Rise Heart and then you win, or you drop Shifter on your opponent and you win. That's kind of the whole idea. And if you're playing the Snake Eyes variant in particular, you lose all of that advantage. So I really don't think that version is very good. Sure, you could play like Snake Eyes just in general, but if you're trying to like play Snake Eyes Castia, it's just play Snake Eyes at that point. You're just better off doing that and playing like non-engine. But all in all, I think the deck's okay. I think it's fine. Yeah. Next up, we have Labyrinth. Labyrinth is going to be one of the first decks in Tier 1. Why? Because it plays so favorably against a lot of the meta, as well as a lot of the decks that specifically want to counter said meta. So for example, 1, it has the ability to play lots of hand traps. Fantastic. That's really good when you're playing against Snake Eyes, and seeing all of those hand traps and basically preventing the opponent from playing is very good. 2, it has a great turn 1 that doesn't die to things like Ash Blossom, Nibiru, Droll, etc. These cards that oftentimes are seeing play now because of Snake Eyes. In fact, it can even play around things like Effect Veiler very effortlessly, right? So all of these things really boost it and make it just stronger in its current state, because it basically plays around what everyone is expecting to see, right? That being Snake Eyes. So yeah, it's just in a fantastic spot right now and is definitely a tier 1 strategy and is going to help you climb significantly. I would highly suggest playing more hand trap centric strategies and kind of just relying on the hand traps to stop the opponent, to slow them down, and then utilizing the advantage that you get off of things like Stovey Torby and Chandelier to generate you consistent advantage. Next up, we have Mana. Mana's in Tier 2. Now, I know what you're saying. What? Mana automatically wins going first. Problem. We are currently playing a very hand trap heavy format. Things like Maxi, Droll, Nibiru being very, very common. All 3 of those basically entirely shut down everything that Manadimian is wont to do. Meaning, it's not very good. It's just not. When everyone is main decking all of these cards, all of a sudden Manadimian gets significantly worse. You're better off playing Mana or Super Heavy Samurai or any sort of combo strategy when there are less hand traps in the format. Or if people aren't prepared for you. And right now, people are just prepared for this. It's okay. It's definitely still good, and it can definitely get you to Diamond or to Master 1. Is it something that is going to have major issues, especially going second, and especially playing into such a hand trap heavy format? Yeah. But sometimes you'll just draw better than your opponents. It's that simple. Speaking of drawing better than your opponents, Mech. Mech, I think, is just generally pretty good. There was some minor, and I genuinely mean minor, hits to Mech. The biggest thing is that now you can't go for like Small World and utilize a Parallel Exceed for a bridge or for a reveal in order to get your Mech Circular online and then still have the Parallel Exceed as follow-up later. So, it's okay. But the biggest boon to this deck in particular is, 1, it has so many extenders. Nibiru is a joke. It's seriously annoying. You have to Nibiru like at the exact right time for it to actually matter. So there's that. But 2, and more importantly, is the fact that it plays around Droll and Maxi a lot better than things like Manadimian. The main reason for this is because, 1, going second, if your opponent drops a Maxi on you, cool. You just make Update Jammer access code, or you make the myriad of other ways that you can just OTK your opponent, and you can do that through multiple hand traps pretty easily, thanks to how busted this card is. But Droll basically also doesn't exist for this deck. Like, yeah, it kind of does, and it definitely hurts a little, but it's not nearly as bad if you get Circular into rotation. For example, if you search something and then search Circular, yeah, obviously a Droll there would have been an issue, but if you just search out Circular and then go from there, the Mech player is just going to be a lot better off. So all in all, I think it's a little bit better. Next up, we have Infern Noble. Infern Noble is probably the best of the of the combo decks that are currently playable. The main reason for this is because Infern Noble, unlike these other ones, gets to play fire monsters, which is really powerful right now, with things like Diabellstar allowing you access to all of those fire monsters. It's just the better combo deck. That's it. It does the same things. It's just a better combo deck. Yeah, it still loses to Droll, it still loses to Maxi, similar to all of these other decks, but unlike something like Manadimian, it has just as high of highs, which doesn't really matter. At that point, you're basically guaranteed the win. But more importantly, it has the ability to run a lot of that fire engine to allow you access to like play through boards or to interact with boards more favorably while also still playing a lot of that engine. I just think it's very, very strong, and yeah, I don't know. these two are about the same. I'm gonna put Infern Noble above, but they're about the same on this list. I'm gonna put Phantom Knights in nope. Phantom Knights are just not good right now. Yes, they did get the boost because of the Water Enchantress coming back to 2. So Adventure in general gives you better lines with the Phantom Knight stuff. But I think the better deck to utilize something like the Adventure would be Prank Kids. And while Prank Kids aren't on here, I'd probably at best put them at Rogue. They're not going to be great. Maybe they'll be playable, but they're not really going to do a whole lot. They've just been power crept, and they're not really all that great into Maxi and Droll and Nibiru and stuff like that. So while they're not terrible, I think it'd be better. Phantom Knights just aren't great. Better off playing Prank Kids. Next up we have Pearly. Oh, how the mighty have fallen. I still think Pearly is pretty strong and pretty slept on. It still has the ability to basically make its same end boards that it did previously, which are still very good. Don't get me wrong, they're still incredibly powerful. Especially because you can, I believe you can shuffle back cards that are in the grave. But more importantly, you can just, like, shuffle away a whole bunch of cards. Like, for example, your opponent normal summons Ash, great, you could shuffle that away. They special summon the Poplar, great, you just shuffle that away, you know? And then they basically get no advantage off of that, which is very nice. So, yeah, all in all, it's still very good. It's just inconsistent. That's the biggest downside to it. Next up, we have Rescue Ace. Rescue Ace I'm going to put into tier 1.5. Yeah, Rescue Ace is very, very strong. I think a lot of people are really sleeping on the Snake Eye Rescue Ace variant. Yes, we don't have things like Emergency and Preventer, which are very nice and very helpful when it comes to future plays for Rescue Ace, or what we see in the TCG and OCG, and what made them top tier strategies or the best deck in the room. But honestly, even without that, I still feel like this deck is very, very powerful. It has a lot of utility, specifically by being able to set 4. The biggest issue is playing a whole bunch of, like, bricks, basically, instead of all of that engine. But I think that's honestly more worth it, because you have a more guaranteed strong turn 1 with a lot more options available to you. And while yes, your like turn 2 options aren't as powerful, I think it's still very, very strong, and can also do just the same combos that Snake Eyes does. So there you go. Next up we have Rika. Rika's fine. Rika does what Rika does, and it dies to Droll. Rika's fine, I would imagine. I think it's okay. I don't know. In such a combo-centric format where people are prepared for combo decks, it just kind of loses that edge of being anything that does anything. And especially with how nuanced the format is when it comes to interactions, having Con is very nice, but also Con doesn't quite do enough when it comes to, like, Promethean Princess, right? Or, like, all of the Snake Eyes engine and stuff like that. So there you go. Next up, we have Snake Eyes. Now, I think you've probably noticed, but there is no tier 0 on this list, because genuinely, in a best of 1, there just isn't a tier 0. But more importantly, I don't think Snake Eyes is at a point where it could be considered tier 0, maybe in representation, but this is not about representation. This is about what's going to be the best for you to climb with. And I think Snake Eyes is very strong, and I do think it's the best deck, by far. What I do think, though, is that it's not tier 0. It's not something that is going to immediately give you wins or be the only deck that's playable. There are a lot of other decks that are playable, and there are a lot of other decks that people are playing to specifically counter this deck, which means if you are playing this deck, you better be better. Or people are going to have it out for you, which makes it a lot more difficult. So again, while this may have representation in terms of how popular it is for like a tier 0 style deck, I don't necessarily think that it is so far and away above every other deck, right? We're missing a lot of cards that really do make this deck so much more powerful than a lot of the other decks in the format. Things like SP Little Knight, things like the Raging Phoenix right now in in the TCG and in the OCG, they have Raging Phoenix, the Salamangreat monster, which gives them access to an OTK line, which is very efficient. You also have things like the bonfire and additional access to those fires and stuff like that. So all in all, while I do think that this deck is very strong, I don't think it's by far and away the best deck. Also, one thing that I think really doesn't help this deck is not having a side deck. I feel like this deck, as well as most best decks, tends to do better when they have a side deck, so that they can guarantee that like their games 2 and 3 are just, they just look better, right? Depending on whether they're going first or second. And I think those, like, that best of one moment where people are able to just kind of like take you by surprise by playing like weird text or stuff like that, it tends to work against it rather than for it. Next up we have Sprite. Sprite is very strong. Sprite is pretty good. There's a lot of benefits to being able to play Sprite right now. It's kind of a weird like mid-range deck, which is pretty nice because unlike a lot of the like hard combo decks, it still has the ability to at least interact with the opponent favorably. I think against like specifically Snake Eyes, it doesn't have the greatest of matchups. And while yes, Snake Eyes is very important, I think it does pretty well, if not has like a favorable matchup against most of the rest of the decks. Whether going first or going second, it has enough of utility when it comes to like non-engine to either interrupt the boards or to board break them if they are most of these other decks. But when it comes to and then like still have the ability to combo off. So I don't know. I think Sprite's pretty good. I think it's still very underrated. I think there's a lot of different ways to play it as well, with like the Runic for Hire Sprite, the Tri-Brigade Sprite, the Live Twin Sprite. All of these are very strong and very playable. Some more so than others, but even so, very good. Still a strong deck. There you go. Next up, we have Super Heavy Samurai, and yeah, I actually do believe that this is probably one of the worst combo decks. It's still very strong, don't get me wrong, but the ability to not play things like Called By and Crossout really do hinder it, and make it a lot worse in the current metagame because of all of the answers that you basically need things like Called By and Crossout for, right? It dies to Droll. Great. Everyone's playing Droll anyway. It dies to Nibiru. Great. Everyone's playing Nibiru anyway. It dies to Maxi. Great. Everyone's playing Maxi anyway. Right. And it doesn't really have ways to play around that. Sure, it gets to play, 20 hand traps similar to something like Snake Eyes, but the biggest difference is that, like, unlike Snake Eyes, you kind of have, like, 1 or 2 cards that can kind of just end the turn, right? Even a well-placed Imperm or Ash Blossom or something like that can also end the turn, right? So there's that. I still think it's good being able to play. I guess the biggest downside is like not being able to play things like Imperm, things like Called By and Crossout and stuff like that. But it's still good. It's still a very strong deck, and it sees a lot of representation. Anyway, next up we have Sword Soul. Sword Soul's, it's kind of bad. The biggest problem with Sword Soul is that its boards are extremely easy to play through and extremely breakable. So, sure, if they are able to play through like multiple hand traps, or they're able to set up their board and, your opponent just has nothing, yeah, it's pretty decent. But Sword Soul right now just isn't really all that strong, mostly due to the fact that Sword Soul just doesn't have, like, it can push through boards, but not the, like, Snake Eyes boards or, like, a Labyrinth board or something like that. And, yes, it can make boards, but boards that die to, like, a Fenrir. Or 2, I guess. But, like, lots of stuff like that where it's just, like, its boards are pretty weak. And its overall game plan is just not as strong as it used to be. And that's the biggest downside. Also, calling Dark now doesn't really do anything with Protoss. So, yeah, what are you going to do? Call Fire? That requires some very, very specific setup. And sure, it could work. And then your opponent reveals that they're playing Labyrinth and you just die. Right? I think it's fine. It's not great. Next up, we have Branded. Branded's very strong. It's a very good deck. yes, getting one branded opening. Actually, putting branded opening to one may make it more consistent. I swear, branded players always draw one-ofs because half of their deck are one-ofs, but like they see their one-ofs more often than they see like the three-ofs, which is very interesting. So there's that. But the branded opening hit is a slap on the wrist and nothing else. It is for cosmetics, and that is it. And honestly, yeah, I still think the deck is very, very strong. In fact, most of the time, I don't see them even resolve a branded opening, and they're still just killing me through, like, 4 hand traps. And I'm just like, okay, cool. Just draw the God Hand. You will. You're a branded player. You just draw the God Hand. Next up, we have Tierliament. I'm going to put this here. Hear me out. Tierliament got a boost in the most recent ban list, getting King of the Swamp to 3, which gives them access to 3 fusion summons once again. They were literally overpowered with 3 fusion summons. Now, granted, that was with Kelbeck and Agito, which we don't have anymore. Pog. But, even with that being said, the deck is still very powerful. It still has the ability to make its end boards very efficiently. And yes, it technically loses to, like, Shifter, which is a little bit more common now. But the problem is that, sure, you could be playing a Shifter deck, but unlike every other deck that also loses to Shifter, like literally every deck on this list, except for, like, this one, it also doesn't lose to other hand traps as well. Like, it plays around Maxi extremely well because of Kit Kalos. You can, like, summon the Kit Kalos, that's one draw for them, and then you get the search, you search out a guy, and then you're able to play the game because you have Kit Kalos on the field, and then you just kind of, like, go from there, right, and play on the opponent's turn, which is great. It doesn't really care about Droll. It doesn't really care about Nibiru. It has the ability to basically set up the Rukalos before getting into Nibiru territory. So if the opponent were to even activate Nibiru, it's not going to do anything. So all in all, I feel like it's just better for you if... yeah, I just think it's a really strong deck, and I think it's pretty consistent as well, especially with access to 3 of the King of the Swamp. So yeah, there's that. Next up, we have Vanquish Soul. Vanquish Soul is pretty good. I think it's fine. One notable thing that I've seen is people playing it with Snake Eyes. Sure, why not? But all in all, the deck is fine. It's pretty good. I don't think it was ever, like, as good as people made it out to be. The deck's incredibly fun. It was never tier 1. It was never going to be tier 1. Sure, it could be the most popular, but it was never going to be the best deck. So there's that. It's fun, though. Next up, we have Zodiac, and I'm gonna put Zodiac really high, and here's why. Zodiac is fantastic for climbing specifically. I have done this multiple metas in a row now. Zodiac Castia is super powerful. 2 reasons. 1, you can play Shifter, just immediately win the game on the spot. 2, you can make a Rise Heart. Awesome. And 3, it goes first and going second really well. I know I said 2, but I forgot about a Rise Heart for a second. But yeah, the biggest thing is, like, you get to play Shifter, which is great, and also banish with, like, a Rise Heart, which is also great. But then the biggest thing is, like, it goes first and second very, very well. Its biggest upside is the fact that it has the ability to go first and be a going first deck that, when it loses the coin flip, might actually be better. Which sounds really weird, but when your opponent thinks that they are going to be playing against a going second deck, they do things differently. So when you win a coin flip and actively choose to go second, the opponent internalizes this and plays differently. They go, I'm going to make a board that you cannot beat because you're probably playing a whole bunch of board breakers and stuff like that. You actively chose to go second. I'm going to make sure I have, like, an Omni Negate and stuff like that. But when they choose to go first and win the coin flip, all of a sudden, they're going to play like normal and not make these weird end boards. Which means your board breakers, your hand traps, your etc. that really slow down the opponent are able to really shine. And also Zeus is a powerhouse. It just is. That's just the case. It's really, really strong. So being able to, like, make Zeus without activating any effects is also very nice. And it has a massive surprise factor. No one is really prepared to just get Shifter dropped it on them, and then you normal summon a Zodiac and just make a 9-mat Zeus. It's a 6-mat Zeus, but still. No one is prepared for that. And on top of that, being able to still utilize the Castia stuff and the consistency that a lot of these cards provide, it just is like the best of both worlds when it comes to Castia and Zodiac, because it can play the 20 hand traps to slow down things like Snake Eyes, while still having the ability to play going first and going second very well, while not being Snake Eyes. So it can play Shifter. It's fantastic. I may be overselling this, but I do genuinely believe that this deck is very, very strong and is really good for specifically climbing. Is it going to pop off in tournaments? No, absolutely not. It's terrible in a best-of-3 format, but in a best-of-1, it's great and it's very underrated. However, if everyone all of a sudden starts playing this, it'll be bad. So take that with a grain of salt. Anyway, that's going to be it for this list. Hopefully this gives you a general idea as to what to be looking for when playing, and what to be looking out for as well. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy it, and remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.